Angry Video Game Nerd is a web show from Cinemassacre, created by and starring James Rolfe. He got his start making videos all the way in 2004, before YouTube was even a thing, where he uploaded them to his website, cinemassacre.com. With encouragement from his friends like Bootsy Spankin's PI, Kyle Justin, the guitar guy, and of course, Mike Matei.
Ain't I a fucking stinker, motherfucker?
His impact on the internet as a whole is pretty undisputable, considering all the carbon copies that came after him. Plus, it seemed that no matter where you were in time, from Screw Attack to game trailers, all the way up to now to YouTube and Amazon Video, the nerd is always here in some way or another. He's a pretty big inspiration to me, and I'd even go as far as to call him a hero of mine. So, I don't know if I just want to pay tribute or what, but I wanted to recollect my top 10 personal favorite Angry Video Game Nerd episodes. I doubt this list will ever get updated, especially considering the series as a whole and how that's doing now. Oh, and by the way, I'm usually pretty family friendly, but just for the occasion I figured I'd go uncensored for this. So please, leave your pitchforks and torches outside my house. But with that out of the way, let's flip the shit switch and turn up that diarrhea dial. It's my top 10 Angry Video Game Nerd episodes.
But are you willing to bet that it's going to get really bad once you start playing? Yeah, well, guess what? It gets bad as soon as you press the start button. The fuck was that? Ghostbusters!
Some of my favorite aspects of the show is him going into something he really enjoys, then comparing it to a horrible adaptation and him just ripping it apart. Everybody knows the old Ghostbusters games on NES and Atari were trash, but let's find out why they were trash. From the vivid detail he goes into when it comes to the game, to the little gags like calling a vacuum store, or showing off his Ghostbuster merch. Not to mention that part about Ghostbusters 3, the sequel that never came to be. It's a sad episode looking in hindsight, given how hopeful he was that eventually a real third movie might happen, starring the original cast. But with that aside though, this episode is a scary good time.
Even if the whole movie's just the Ghostbusters sitting around taking a shit, I'd go see it.
Hey, you still don't own a Sega CD? What are you waiting for? Nintendo to make one?
You know that part of the intro where it says that he's gonna take you back to the past? That's pretty clear in this classic episode, where the nerd explores the Sega CD, a failed attempt at keeping the Genesis alive. I think my favorite line of the episode is,
How would you like it if I conduct the rest of the video like this? Full motion video, my ass. I'd rather it be full fucking screen.
my favorite aspect of this episode is how he can start off a little bit optimistic when it comes to the game, but he ultimately shows us why the console failed. Sega's history is very interesting to me, because by all means they should have won the console wars against Nintendo, but we all know how that ended, and we all know who came out on top.
The frog's name is Horny?
I'm gonna review a good game for once. Yeah, now don't worry, I'll go back to torture myself with shitty ones, but for now, let's do something awesome.
Now this is a very special episode to me, because it was actually my very first nerd episode. Now, keep in mind, this episode was released way back in 2008. How old was I back then? I was 8. So naturally the idea of vigorous curse words was not something I enjoyed. I didn't have unlimited or free access to the internet back then either. My parents still had the original blocky Apple model computer. So one day, 8-year-old me is on the computer when my cousin says, "Hey, you like Super Mario Brothers, right? Well, how about you watch this?" He cues up the episode and I'm just sitting there in shock like, what the heck? You can't say bad words on the internet, you're supposed to be nice. Why is the cartridge dropping F-bombs? Why is it throwing up? Why is Jesus a robot? Needless to say, I made him turn it off. But years later in high school, this exact same episode popped into my YouTube recommendations, and the rest is history. The original version of the video was also a double feature, featuring his review of the game, and also a review of the 1980 movie The Wizard. It was in this movie that Mario 3 was actually shown off for the first time. From the nerd genuinely enjoying the game, to the absurd conspiracy theory at the end, the exorcism homage, and of course the ending battle with the devil and Super Mecha Death Christ 2000! BC version 4.0 beta, bitch! It's an awesome episode that deserves a spot on the list just for being my first glimpse into Cinemassacre.
Holy shit!
What's that fucking language?
I think everyone knows that Halloween is my favorite holiday and favorite time of the year. It's also become a Halloween tradition of mine to marathon Cinemassacre's Monster Madness. It seems that Halloween and the nerd go hand in hand, because even before this series of episodes existed, he excelled at making fun and exciting specials. But here he takes a break and plays one of his favorite video game franchises, Castlevania. I grouped these 4 videos together as one because it's a big marathon on the same subject, so I hope you won't get upset. Now, I don't want anyone nitpicking or shitpicking in the comments, alright? It's my list. These episodes often go on people's #1 spot when it comes to counting nerd episodes, and I can agree. And while these episodes are special, they aren't special enough to make the top 3. Though they do have everything that I think makes a great nerd episode. You have references to the very first episode with his entire re-review of Simon's Quest, you have an angry rant at unfair parts of the game, you have confusion over video game titles, you have nitpicking, you got beer drinking, and of course, you're taken back to the past. This episode also features one of my all-time favorite nerd moments ever.
In its final stages, it plays the music from all 3 of the NES games. It's like nostalgic memories of a Nintendo game within another Nintendo game. That's it, the perfect Castlevania game. Atari, ah yes, a name so dearly loved from the golden age of history. A magical time when there was no internet, no cell phones, just electronic video games. Okay, it was the dark age.
I don't know about you guys, but I often queue up some videos to go to sleep to. The Atari Jaguar episodes are ones that I can always jump to in the playlist because not only is the topic itself interesting, it's really entertaining. I never knew Atari had any presence after the 2600 until I watched this video. Whether I was ignorant of my history or Atari really did just fall off that hard is debatable, but what isn't debatable is how great these episodes are. You'll find that him going into the history of something and going in detail about it is a big favorite of mine. And I know that some people love the absurd, and I know some people love him ripping into something, but this is something I greatly enjoy because I like him just explaining things and putting his own spin on it. We get to see both the lackluster focus of games and the console issues themselves. The Jaguar itself, it reminds me a lot of the Xbox One and its series of consoles, because it's something that mostly focused on graphics, but fell short in the game department.
Well, we do know that Atari was originally planning a 32-bit system called the Panther, but decided to skip it and leap ahead. The Jaguar still used a 32-bit graphic processing unit, but through a combination of other processors somehow added up to 64. It's technical and confusing, but the point is the Jaguar was a rare species, not built like most game consoles. That made it harder for programmers to develop games on it, and as a result, many games didn't utilize its full capabilities, whatever they could have been.
Like I said before, I like to play nerd episodes to help me sleep, which can be a problem when I'm lying there in bed, almost asleep, and then I'm blindsided by Mike Matei going before the video starts. There's no sleeping when it comes to this episode. It's always got my full attention. I've heard some people complain that this episode isn't that great because he doesn't focus on the games and instead the focus is on the skit with Bugs Bunny and the fight scenes, but that's the whole point of the video. Crazy Castle and its sequels are all so bad, and there's so many of them, that there's no point on focusing on them. The sheer absurdity of there being so many games is what drives the plot forward, and the nerd and Bugs' many fights. Mike Matei as Bugs Bunny is hilarious. When he isn't being slightly frightening, that is.
Getting shit on the fucking face! That feels good, Doc. Yeah, just like good old times, Doc. Like when I shoved Elmer Fudd's head up the Tasmanian Devil's fucking asshole.
The amazing choreography, the fights, the camera angles, the props, the insanity of the premise itself, and a cameo from the guitar guy make it an amazing watch from start to finish. It's got some of my favorite rants, insults, lines, facial expressions, and moments of all time that always make me laugh out loud no matter where I'm at. I think something that makes a nerd episode great like this one is one question. Could you watch this episode in public or with some other people in the room? Now when it comes to taking you back to the past, you can't get any better than this.
Ass!
Get the power, Nintendo power. power. Higher and higher, fighting your way through enemy fire.
In my opinion, this should be your first AVGN episode that either you watch for yourself or you show to your friends. It's that good. A little light on the anger, sure, but that's the point. It's time to chill out and kick back with the Nintendo Power. It's a nostalgia-induced throwback. There's nothing quite like looking through those old magazines. From my growing poster collection to the few issues that I own, I really missed out on the golden age of its run. This episode's important because it shows really how different things were back then, along with its eventual decline. It's a great look into the pre-internet guide world, and there really was a sense of community that these books brought. I remember back in elementary school, a friend of mine snuck in like 4 issues of these things, and we'd all read them during lunchtime. They ended for obvious reasons back in 2012, but that doesn't change the fact that even towards the end of its life, if you had it, you were the man.
That's because you had the power. Nintendo power, motherfucker!
Remember back when I first warned you about the horrors of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde on NES? Well, there were a few other games I mentioned there.
Those little Tiger, like, electronic wrist games, those are better than Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Have we gotten to that point now? Is it time to scrape the bottom of the toilet bowl of the whole video game industry? Yeah, it's time to talk about Tiger games.
Even though I said Nintendo Power should be the first episode you watch or show a friend, in my opinion, this is the quintessential, finest example of what a nerd episode is. You got long angry rants, beer, callbacks to the first episode, history, ripping into a shitty game, and even a cameo from the Bullshit Man. Tiger Electronic Games is a favorite episode of many of my friends, and for good reason too. I acknowledge that and I know why, but it just barely misses the top spot for me. Some of the key humor, like the Crazy Castle episodes, is just on how long they kept making these things and how many there were. Full House, DuckTales, Sonic games, Nintendo games, Konami games, it was absurd. He basically covers the entire history of Tiger, from handheld games, wrist games, Pokemon, walkie-talkies, yeah! And even a whole fucking Tiger game console. The one thing he didn't mention is that in the early 2000s, there were so many leftover Tiger handhelds that just started giving them away in McDonald's Happy Meals. But I can forgive that because the idea of a grown man going to McDonald's every day is just ridiculous. Oh, and this episode has what is probably my second favorite nerd moment ever.
Nintendo 64, the Bit Wars, 64 bits, 32 bits, 16 bits, 8 bits, 4 bits, 2 bits, 1 bit, half bit, quarter bit, the wrist game!
This might piss off a lot of people, but I'm putting the nerd's magnum opus at the number 2 spot. Originally created as the 100th and final nerd episode, we start off with him being tired of the way he lives. Shitty games, all his life, just hoarding himself with garbage! In his disgruntled state, he picks out Gyromite, and the rest is a crazy look into the past. Rob the robot, or robotic operating buddy, can only play
Gyromite 4, stack up,
and views all other games as inferior, so it's up to the nerd to stop him from destroying not just all the good games, but the bad ones too. It's clear in the end that these games, despite being major stinkers, all hold a place in his heart one way or another. This remains as one of my favorites, from the soundtrack, the fight scenes, the in-depth look at these really lackluster games. This is a must-watch for anybody, not just fans of Cinemassacre or YouTube viewers. Historic lines, the transition to HD, and a great story make this a truly special episode. But what could top R.O.B? Well, before I get into it, here are some honorable mentions. Ninja Gaiden, because I love the ninja character and this scene. Plumbers Don't Wear Ties because of the sheer absurdity of the game and the video.
A disgusting series of plot choices in my life.
A fucking chicken mask!
upside down fucking chicken mask.
There's dogs clapping. I didn't even know that dogs were fucking watching.
And the making of an AVGN episode because of the valuable information and how much of a learning experience it is.
Sometimes I have friends helping out, but most of the time I'm a one-man crew.
With over 100 great episodes, it was hard to narrow it down to this top 10 list. It was harder to narrow it down to some honorable mentions, because trust me, I've got a whole page worth of just those things. But if I were to list off every episode and why it makes it great, this video would be well over an hour long. So let me just fast forward to all that and get to my number 1 pick.
You got a game and a controller. That's the way it goes. So let's take a look at some of the NES accessories.
This is my favorite episode for many of the same reasons that I love Nintendo Power. It takes me back to the past, especially because I own things like the Zapper and Power Pad. Oh, and my uncle also owned the Konami Laser Scope. It gets to me personally. This is biased, and I acknowledge that it is, but hey, it's my list, so who cares? This has a comfy mood to it that isn't replicated in many other episodes. I'm enthralled every time I watch it, and even though I know everything that comes, I still love hearing certain lines or scenes. Some highlights are the Zapper sequence, the bit with the power pad where he's slamming his hands on the floor really fast, the laser scope rant, and of course, drinking Rolling Rock on the Rollin' Rocker! It's a silly episode, and that's one of the reasons I enjoy it. The Top Gun section always has me on the edge of my seat, and it just shows how great James is when it comes to camera and sound work. Everything about this episode is great, and while it might not be your favorite, it certainly hits me where it counts, and I really love it. Another top 10 list come and gone, with my top 10 AVGN episodes in the bag. So whether this list is the Super Mario Bros. Or the Mario Goes Missing of top 10 lists, I hope that you'll leave yours down in the comments below. Share with your friends, and remember, there's only gonna be one true Angry Nerd.